She had been standing in that doorway for exactly 4 seconds before the first guest looked through her. Not past her. Through her. The way you look through a window or a wall, or something that exists only to frame a view rather than occupy it. She was holding a silver tray. The tray alone cost more than her mother had earned in a year. Her uniform was pressed with military precision. Her hands were completely still. And on her left shoulder, hidden beneath starched white fabric, was a crescent-shaped birthmark that was about to detonate 3 lives before the clock struck midnight. Nobody saw her. Nobody ever did. But tonight that was going to change. The Chukwu estate occupied 12 acres on Banana Island, which in Lagos means something specific. It means you have not merely succeeded. It means you have arrived at a level of wealth where success itself becomes invisible, folded into marble floors and Vienna chandeliers and monthly electricity bills that could sustain an entire village for a calendar year. The main house had 42 rooms. The gardening staff alone numbered 8 people. There was a wine cellar, a private cinema, a gym that had never once been used by anyone who actually needed to lose weight. Marcus Chukwu had built his fortune selling telecommunications infrastructure across West Africa. He was 58 years old now, gray at the temples, sharp in the eyes, and wealthy in the particular way that makes other wealthy men feel modest about themselves. His net worth was publicly estimated at $2.3 billion, though the real figure was certainly higher. Men like Marcus did not reveal everything. Revelation was for people who needed to be believed. Marcus had long since passed the stage where he required anyone's belief. His wife Kioma came from a different kind of money. Old money. Banking family wealth that had survived Nigerian independence, multiple coups, structural adjustment programs, recessions, and every seismic social shift the country had endured across 7 decades. She was elegant in the way that very old wealth tends to produce, cool, precise, utterly composed on the surface, and wrapped in a pride so deep and so load-bearing that to remove it would bring down the entire structure. She wore her status the way other women wore jewelry. It was not decoration. It was armor. They had 1 child. Or they used to. 15 years ago, their daughter Grace disappeared. She was 8 years old. They were attending a charity gala at the Echo Hotel. Kioma had turned her back for 2 minutes, perhaps 3. When she turned back, Grace was gone. The security footage showed nothing useful. The Lagos police investigated for months. Private investigators were hired at enormous expense. Billboards went up across the city with a small girl's face and a phone number that rang constantly but never with the right news. Ransom calls came in by the dozen, but every single one was fraudulent. Desperate people playing desperate games with a grieving family's hope. No body was ever found. No evidence. No closure. The case went cold. The marriage went colder. Marcus threw himself into work with the particular ferocity of a man who has discovered that grief, when held at the right angle, can be converted into fuel. Kioma went the other direction. She built a shrine. Grace's bedroom was preserved exactly as it had been on the night she vanished. Pink bedspread. Stuffed animals on the shelves, arranged in the same order. School uniforms still hanging in the closet. Fresh flowers placed on the nightstand every single week for 15 years. Candles lit every evening. Kioma would sit in that room for hours, silent, the way you sit in a place of worship, not asking for anything, just insisting on presence. Tonight was Grace's birthday. Or what would have been her birthday. Kioma had insisted on the gala. Every year on this date, she organized a fundraising event for a missing children's foundation. It was her way of keeping her daughter alive in the world's attention, or perhaps keeping hope alive in her own chest, or perhaps, if she was being honest with herself in the moments she could bear it, it was her way of performing a grief that the rest of Lagos society had long since moved past. The ballroom was full. Politicians angling for photographs. Business moguls comparing network connections. Old money families in couture. Society women layered in gold and designer labels. A live band played jazz with the careful tastelessness that expensive events tend to require. Waiters circulated with champagne and small plates, suya, puff-puff, imported canapés arranged like architecture. And among those waiters, invisible as always, was Amara. Amara had been working at the Chukwu estate for 3 months. She had been hired through an agency that specialized in placing domestic staff in high-net-worth homes. Her resume was unremarkable by design. No family listed. Education ending at secondary school. Work history, various domestic positions. Personal description, quiet, hardworking, dependable. The agency had described her as the kind of girl who does not need managing. Mrs. Okafor, the head housekeeper, had agreed after the first week. She told the other staff that Amara knew her place, which in that house meant that Amara kept her eyes down, her voice low, and her opinions entirely to herself. She lived in the staff quarters behind the main house. Small room. Wooden bed. Single chair. A crucifix on the wall above a window that looked out onto the garden. She woke at 5 every morning. She cleaned. She served. She disappeared into the function of her role the way well-trained domestic staff learn to disappear into spaces that are not built for them to occupy. The other staff liked her well enough. She didn't gossip. She didn't complain. She didn't ask questions about the family, which in a house like this was both a professional virtue and something of an oddity, because everyone who worked here had questions. The Chukwu story was not a secret. The missing daughter, the cold marriage, the annual gala, the room nobody entered, it was the kind of tragedy that a household absorbed into its architecture over 15 years until it became structural. But there were things about Amara that did not quite fit the story she had presented. Her hands were too soft for someone who claimed to have spent her adult life in manual labor. Her posture was too straight, the kind of posture that comes from being corrected as a child rather than from physical conditioning. Her English, though she had learned to flatten it, was too refined in unguarded moments. The choice of vocabulary, the cadence of her sentences when she forgot to be simple. And sometimes at night, the cook would see her standing alone in the garden, looking up at the lit windows of the main house with an expression that was difficult to name. Sadness, maybe. Or something older than sadness. A kind of hunger that had nothing to do with food. Tonight, Amara moved through the ballroom like smoke. She refilled champagne flutes. She cleared small plates from tables. She smiled pleasantly when guests spoke over her or looked directly through her while making requests. She had learned, over years and years, how to make herself functionally absent. How to exist in a space without disturbing it. How to be present and invisible simultaneously. But tonight, invisibility was going to fail her. Marcus was standing near the grand staircase when it happened. He had a glass of whiskey in his hand and a cabinet minister in front of him, and the minister was explaining something about infrastructure policy with the particular confidence of someone who has not been contradicted in a very long time. Marcus was producing the appropriate responses, a nod here, a murmur of agreement there, while his actual attention was somewhere else entirely. It was always somewhere else on this day. Every year, on Grace's birthday, some part of him became unreachable. He glanced across the room and found Kioma near the stage. She was speaking to the director of the Missing Children's Foundation, composed and elegant and completely unreachable in the way that she had become completely unreachable to him over the years. He knew what would happen after the guests left. She would go upstairs to that room. She would sit in the dark. And she would cry in a way that made no sound at all, which was somehow the worst kind. A waiter moved past him and Marcus reached for another whiskey without looking. His hand met someone's arm instead. He glanced down. It was the new one. The quiet girl. Mark. She pulled back immediately. "I'm sorry, sir." Her voice was soft. Eyes already lowered in the practiced way. "It's fine," Marcus said. She moved to step away and something stopped him. He didn't know what it was. Some instinct operating below the level of conscious thought. Maybe the way she held herself. Maybe something about the line of her jaw or the slight gap between her front teeth. Something that registered as familiar before his mind could identify why. "Wait," he said. She stopped. Turned back. Her expression was completely professional, carefully neutral. "What's your name?" "Amara, sir." "How long have you been working here?" 3 months, sir." He studied her for a moment. Early 20s, he estimated. Dark skin, high cheekbones, a stillness about her that seemed less like calm and more like practiced restraint. Nothing that should make him uneasy. But he was uneasy. Have we met before? You look familiar. Something crossed her face very quickly. Then it was gone. I have one of those faces, sir, she said with a small, rehearsed smile. Marcus wasn't convinced, but he had no foundation for the feeling, and he let her go. What he didn't know was that from across the room, his wife had been watching the entire exchange. Kioma had seen Marcus stop the girl. She had seen him study her face. And now, standing alone near the stage, she felt something shift in her chest that she could not immediately classify. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't suspicion. It was something older and stranger and far more frightening. It was recognition. She didn't know why. She didn't know how. But something about the girl, the angle of her head, the way she stood, something, was making Kioma's heart beat faster in a way it had not beaten since the night 15 years ago when she had turned around at the Echo Hotel and found empty space where her daughter had been standing. She set down her champagne glass and followed. Amara had slipped through a side door into the hallway leading toward the kitchen. Kioma followed her through the door, her heels clicking on marble, the noise of the party falling away behind thick walls. She found the girl in the small butler's pantry, stacking dirty plates onto a tray with careful efficiency. Excuse me. Amara, startled, turned. Ma, I'm sorry. Did you need something? Kioma stepped closer. She was looking at the girl's face the way you look at something you are trying to remember. The curve of the jaw. The shape of the eyes. The slight gap between the front teeth. What's your name? Amara, ma. Where are you from? Enugu, ma. Your family? I have no family. I grew up in an orphanage. Kioma's breath caught. She told herself it meant nothing. Thousands of children grew up in orphanages. It was a coincidence of circumstance, nothing more. Her hands were trembling. She folded them together to hide it. How old are you? 23, ma. 23. The same age Grace would have been. Kioma's vision went slightly liquid. She blinked hard. This was grief doing what grief does, finding shapes in the dark, projecting the lost onto the available. This girl was a stranger, a member of staff, nothing more than. Amara shifted the tray she was holding. Her sleeve pulled back slightly. And Kioma saw it. On Amara's left shoulder, just above the collar of her uniform, partly revealed by the movement of the fabric. A birthmark. Crescent-shaped. Dark against brown skin. Exactly, not approximately, not vaguely, but exactly, like the one Grace had been born with. Kioma's legs gave out. She grabbed the counter's edge and held on. Ma. Amara dropped the tray. The crash was enormous in the small room. She moved to Kioma instantly. Ma, are you all right? Should I call someone? Kioma couldn't speak. She was staring at that birthmark the way you stare at something that should not exist. With her free hand, shaking, she reached out and touched Amara's shoulder. Gently drew the fabric down. The mark was unmistakable. Where did you get this? She whispered. Get what, ma? This mark. On your shoulder. Amara looked confused. I've had it since I was born, ma. It's just a birthmark. Kioma's mind was not working in an orderly way. She was operating on something below thought, below reason, something that lived in the body rather than the brain. She straightened. Her voice came out firmer than she felt. Come with me. Ma, I don't. I said come with me. She did not take her to the ballroom. She took her upstairs, past the guest rooms, past the library, down the long corridor at the east end of the house where no one went anymore. She stopped in front of a white door. Amara stood behind her in the hallway, her heart loud in her ears. She did not know what was happening. She did not know why this woman was looking at her the way people look at things they cannot afford to hope for. Kioma opened the door. The room was exactly as it had been 15 years ago. Pink walls. Stuffed animals arranged on shelves with a child's careful logic. A small desk with crayons still scattered across its surface as though the child had stepped away for a moment and would return. Photographs in silver frames catching the light from the hallway. Kioma walked to the dresser. She picked up one of the framed photographs and turned it to face Amara. A little girl. 7 or 8 years old. Dark skin, gap-toothed smile, crescent birthmark clearly visible on her left shoulder. Photographed in this very room, standing in front of those very shelves, laughing at something off camera. Amara stared at the photograph. Then at Kioma. Then back at the photograph. "Who is this?" she whispered. Kioma's voice broke clean in half. "My daughter Grace. She disappeared 15 years ago." "Ma, I don't understand what this has to do with." "You have her birthmark." The words came out flat and absolute. The exact same mark in the exact same place. "Lots of people have birthmarks, Ma. Not like this." Kioma's hands were shaking so badly she had to set the frame down. "Not exactly like this." Amara took a step backward. "Ma, I think you're upset. Maybe I should go back." "How old were you when you went to the orphanage?" Amara hesitated. "I don't remember, Ma. I was very young." "Do you know your birth name?" "No, Ma. The nuns gave me the name Amara." "Do you remember anything from before the orphanage?" Kioma's voice was barely controlled. "Anything at all?" The question landed in Amara the way certain questions do, not on the surface, but deep in some place that doesn't have a name. She had been asked versions of this question her entire life. By nuns, by social workers, by casually curious people who thought that not knowing your origin was an interesting thing to disclose at dinner parties. She had always answered the same way. "No, Ma. Nothing." Kioma stared at her for a long, unbearable moment. Then she turned and walked out of the room. She went straight to Marcus. The party was still going. The band was still playing. Glasses were still clinking. But when Marcus saw his wife appear at the edge of the ballroom, her face the color of ash, her hands not quite steady, he knew with the particular precision of 23 years of marriage that something had cracked open. He crossed the room without excusing himself from the conversation he was in. "What happened?" "Come with me. Now." She led him upstairs. Down the corridor. To Grace's room, where Amara was still standing, pale and uncertain and frightened in a way she was trying not to show. Marcus looked at his wife. "Kioma, what is this?" "Look at her shoulder." "What?" "Her shoulder, Marcus. Look." Amara glanced between them. Slowly, she pulled down the collar of her uniform. Marcus saw the birthmark. His body went rigid in the specific way a body goes rigid when the ground beneath it shifts. He did not speak for several seconds. "It's the same," Kioma said. "Lots of people have birth. In the exact same place. The exact same shape." Kioma's voice was rising despite herself. "Marcus, look at her face." He had thought she looked familiar downstairs. He had attributed it to one of those meaningless coincidences of memory, a face that triggers an association without meaning anything. But now, in this room, with the photograph on the dresser and the stuffed animals on the shelves and the crescent mark on the girl's shoulder, now he looked at the curve of her cheekbones, the gap in her front teeth, and something inside him that had been locked for 15 years began to shake against its door. "What's your birth name?" he asked. His voice was not entirely steady. "I don't know, sir. I grew up in an orphanage in Enugu." "How old when you arrived?" "Very young, sir. I don't remember." "Do you remember anything from before?" Amara's eyes filled. "No, sir. I've tried. My whole life I've tried. I don't remember anything." Marcus looked at his wife. Something moved between them. The first real thing that had moved between them in years. "Call Dr. Nwosu," he said quietly. "Tell him it's urgent." The doctor arrived within the hour. He had served the Chukwu family for 20 years. He knew when to ask questions and when silence was the professional thing. He took the samples quickly and efficiently and promised results within 72 hours. Then he left. The party had ended by then. The guests were gone. The staff had cleared and retired. Only 3 people remained in the sitting room. Marcus, Kioma, Amara. Nobody spoke for a very long time. Finally, Kioma said, "Tell us everything you remember." Amara looked at her hands. "Ma, I've told you. I don't remember anything before the orphanage." "Try. Anything. A face, a voice, a color, a smell." Amara closed her eyes. She had done this hundreds of times over the years, alone in her room at the orphanage, later in various small rented rooms in various cities, trying to reach back into the fog of her earliest years and pull something solid out of it. Usually there was nothing. Just the orphanage, and before the orphanage, nothing. But tonight, something was different. Something about this room, this house, these people, was disturbing the settled sediment of her memory. I remember someone singing, she said slowly. A woman's voice. So, I remember feeling completely safe. Kioma made a sound she couldn't suppress. I remember a room with pink walls. Toys. A stuffed elephant. Amara opened her eyes. They were wet. I remember being scared. Loud voices. Someone taking my hand and telling me we had to go, that it wasn't safe. Who? Marcus asked. Who took your hand? I can't see their face. Everything after that is blank. The next thing I remember clearly is the orphanage. I was 5 or 6, I think. The nuns said I had been found wandering near a market in Enugu. No identification. No name. No memory. The room was silent. Then Amara said something that made both of them turn sharply. I didn't come here by accident. What do you mean? Kioma asked. I saw your family on the news. A feature about the missing children's charity. She looked at them steadily. I saw your faces and I felt something I can't explain. Not memory. Just recognition. Like something in me knew something my mind couldn't access. So you applied to work here, Marcus said. Yes, sir. Why? Amara's voice broke. Because I have spent my entire life not knowing who I am. And when I saw you, I thought, if I could just be close to you, maybe something would come back. Maybe I would remember. Maybe I would finally know. Kioma stood abruptly. She crossed the room and knelt in front of Amara and took both of her hands. If you are my daughter, she whispered, if you are Grace, do you understand what that means? Amara nodded. Tears were running down her face freely now. It means I never stopped looking for you. It means every single day for 15 years, I prayed you were alive somewhere in this world. It means you are not alone. Kioma's voice broke entirely. You have never been alone. Amara sobbed, and Kioma pulled her into her arms and held her the way she had held her daughter the last night she had seen her 15 years ago, when the world was still whole. Across the room, Marcus watched with his jaw clenched and his eyes wet and his hands balled into fists in his pockets. He wanted to believe. But belief required proof. And proof required 3 more days. Those 3 days were the longest of his life. He could not work. He could not hold a thought for more than a few minutes before it dissolved into the single question that had displaced everything else. Kioma had moved Amara into one of the guest rooms and refused to discuss the appropriateness of this. She wanted her close. She needed her close. And Marcus understood this even as it frightened him, because if the test came back wrong, if this turned out to be grief making shapes in the dark, the fall would be catastrophic. He watched Amara during those 3 days with the careful attention of someone looking for proof in both directions. And what he saw disturbed him in ways he couldn't entirely account for. The way she tilted her head slightly to the left when she was thinking through a problem. The way she tucked her hair behind her left ear when she was trying not to show that something had affected her. The way she laughed, rare, and when it came, very quiet, as though she had learned somewhere along the way that taking up space was a thing that required justification. All of it was grace. Or all of it was wishful thinking. After 15 years, he genuinely could not tell the difference. On the morning of the 3rd day, Dr. Nwosu called. He said the results were ready and that he would come himself. The 3 of them sat in the study and waited. When he arrived, he carried a sealed envelope. He looked at them, at Marcus, at Kioma, at the young woman sitting between them with her hands folded in her lap, and his expression was carefully, professionally neutral. Before I open this, he said, I want to prepare you. Whatever it says, this will change your lives. Are you ready? Marcus nodded. Kioma reached for Amara's hand. Dr. Nwosu opened the envelope. He read it in silence. Then he looked up. He smiled. She is your daughter, he said softly. Amara is Grace. The sound Kioma made was not a word. It was 15 years of held breath releasing at once. Relief and joy and grief and something beyond all of those that does not have a name. She pulled Amara into her arms and held her and said her name over and over, the real name, the given name, whispering it into her hair like a prayer that had finally been answered. My Grace. My baby. Marcus sat frozen for a moment. Then his legs simply stopped working and he sank into his chair and put his face in his hands and wept in a way he had not allowed himself to weep in 15 years. And Grace, who had been Amara for as long as she could remember, who had grown up not knowing her name or her people or the room with pink walls that had lived at the edge of her dreams, sat in the center of it all, overwhelmed beyond language, trying to absorb the fact that she was not who she had believed herself to be. She was Grace Chukwu. She had a mother and a father and a home. She had been wanted and searched for and mourned and prayed over for 15 years. She was home. But joy, when it arrives after that much absence, does not arrive cleanly. It arrives with questions. If Grace had been alive all this time, where had she been? Who had taken her? And why, after keeping her hidden, had they let her go? Marcus called Inspector Okonkwo that same afternoon. The inspector had worked the original case 15 years ago. He remembered every detail. When he saw Grace, something moved across his face that he quickly rearranged into professional composure. Then he sat across from her with a notepad, and they began. Grace told him what she remembered. The gala. Her mother in a blue dress. The boredom of a child at a grown-up event. Wandering off. A woman who smiled at her and said she had something to show her. The walk outside to a car. The moment she understood something was wrong. The hand over her mouth. The drive to a house far from Lagos. A room where she was kept for months, fed and clothed and told, repeatedly, by a woman who was kind in most ways except the fundamental one, that her parents did not want her anymore. What did this woman look like? Okonkwo asked. I don't remember her face clearly. But I remember she had a scar. Her right hand, between the thumb and the first finger. Okonkwo wrote quickly. She drove me to Enugu eventually, Grace continued. She said she couldn't keep me anymore. That it had become too dangerous. She left me near a market and told me to walk and not look back. Did she ever tell you why she took you? No. But I remember once, late at night, I heard her crying. She said something about a promise. About money. About fixing a mistake. Marcus, who had been very still throughout this recounting, went rigid. Money, he repeated. Yes, sir. He looked at Okonkwo. Someone paid her to take my daughter. That is the most likely reading of what you've described, Okonkwo said. The question is who? The investigation moved with the focused speed that reactivated cold cases sometimes generate. Okonkwo reopened the file. He pulled evidence that had been in storage for 15 years. He re-examined the hotel security footage with technology that hadn't existed when it was first reviewed. And he found something that had been missed before. A woman in the hotel's housekeeping staff the night of the gala. Mid-30s. A scar on her right hand. She had been employed there under a temporary contract that ended the week after Grace disappeared. Her name, on file, was Ngozi Yis. Okonkwo tracked her down. She was living in a small village outside Enugu under a different name, but with the same face and the same scar. When the police arrived, she did not run. She sat down at her kitchen table and she confessed. She had been hired. Paid 500,000 naira. Instructed to take the child, keep her hidden for a year, then release her somewhere far from Lagos. She had convinced herself it was temporary. She had convinced herself, somehow, that a child taken from her parents for a year and deposited alone in a strange market at the age of 9 was something survivable, even manageable. Who hired you? Okonkwo pressed. Ngozi hesitated for a long time. Then she said a name. The name of Mrs. Patricia Okafor. The head housekeeper at the Chukwu estate. The woman who had worked for the family for 2 decades. The woman who had, 3 months ago, reviewed Amara's application and approved her hiring. Kioma's cousin. The arrest happened at dawn. Mrs. Okafor did not resist. She sat in the back of the police vehicle with the stillness of someone who has been waiting for this moment for a long time and has made a kind of peace with it. At the station, she confessed without requiring much encouragement. She had been desperate. Her daughter had been critically ill. The surgery required was beyond anything she could afford. Someone had come to her with a proposition. Arrange for the child to disappear for a year. Keep her safe, keep her hidden, then release her somewhere she would be found and cared for. In exchange, the surgery would be paid for, and there would be money left over. She had told herself it wasn't kidnapping. She had told herself the child would be returned. She had told herself a great many things over the 15 years since, and none of them had quite held against the weight of what she had actually done. But Okonkwo did not believe her version of the plan, the mild, almost charitable version where Grace was always going to be returned within the year. Because the money had not originated with Mrs. Okafor. It had passed through her, but its source was elsewhere. When they followed the financial trail, it led somewhere that made Marcus go very quiet and very cold in a way that his staff, when they described it later, said was unlike anything they had ever seen in him before. The money had come from Chief Amici Nwano, his business partner of 20 years. The man who had stood beside Marcus at Grace's memorial service and wept. The man who had helped him build his telecommunications empire from a mid-size operation into a continental force. The man who, 15 years ago, had quietly used the chaos of Marcus's grief to restructure the company, acquire controlling interests, and position himself to absorb 40% of everything Marcus had built. Because 15 years ago, they had been competing for a government telecommunications contract worth several $billion. The contract had a clause about public image. No scandals, no distractions, no principals whose personal circumstances might destabilize the partnership. And Marcus, devastated, functionally absent from the business for months, missing meetings and losing deals and unable to focus on anything except the empty space where his daughter had been, had created exactly the distraction that allowed Amici to step in and take over. Grace's disappearance had not been random. It had been a business decision. Marcus read the file in his office for a very long time. Then he went to his safe. He removed the handgun that he had kept for years and never used. He loaded it. He drove to Amici's estate, where the guards recognized him and waved him through without question. Amici was in his study pouring himself a drink. He looked up when Marcus entered. He saw the gun. He smiled. "I wondered when you'd work it out," he said. "You took my daughter. I paid someone to relocate your daughter temporarily. There's a distinction. She was 8 years old. She was leverage." Amici set down his glass. "You are going to cost us both that contract with your grief and your weakness and your inability to separate business from sentiment. I protected us. You destroyed my family. I preserved your company. Without what I did, you would have lost the contract and everything built on it. You should be thanking me." Marcus's hand was shaking. He was aware of it. He looked at the man he had trusted for 20 years, the man who had sat at his table, attended his daughter's memorials, shared his grief as a performance, and he felt something enormous moving through him. Then he lowered the gun. "You're not worth it," he said. He walked out. Behind him, Amici laughed. The laughter stopped when the police, who had been waiting outside, came through the door. 6 months later, Grace stood in front of a mirror in the room that had always been hers, even in the 15 years she had not known it existed. She was wearing a white dress. Simple, elegant. Tonight was her formal reintroduction, a gala in her honor, a celebration of return. The city that had mourned her was going to welcome her back, and she was trying to decide how she felt about that. Kioma stood behind her, adjusting the clasp of a diamond necklace. "You look beautiful," Kioma said softly. Grace looked at her mother's face in the mirror. "I still don't feel like her." "Like who?" "Grace. The girl in the photographs." Kioma turned her gently by the shoulders. "You are her. You've always been her. You just didn't know it." "I spent 15 years thinking I was nobody," Grace said. "Thinking I didn't matter. Thinking I had no story worth telling. And now you know the truth." Kioma held her face. "You were never nobody. You were loved every single day you were gone. You were wanted and searched for and prayed over. You were always ours." Downstairs, the ballroom filled. Marcus stood near the entrance, greeting guests with the practiced ease of a man who has attended 1,000 events, but his eyes kept drifting to the staircase. When she appeared at the top of the stairs, the room went quiet. She descended slowly, one hand on the railing, her expression not triumphant but something more honest than triumph. Present. Uncertain. Marcus crossed the room and met her at the bottom of the stairs. Ready? He asked. She nodded. And together, father and daughter, they walked into the room. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the house had settled into silence, Grace stood in the garden. The Lagos skyline glittered in the distance. The air was cool and still. She heard footsteps. Marcus came to stand beside her. "Do you ever wonder," she said, "what would have happened if I hadn't seen your faces on the news?" "Every day," he said quietly. "For 15 years. Do you think we would have found each other eventually?" He was silent for a moment, looking out at the city. "I like to think so. But I'm grateful we didn't have to wait any longer." Grace looked at him. "I feel like there's still so much I don't know. So much I lost." Marcus put his hand on her shoulder, on the crescent-shaped mark that had carried her home. "You didn't lose who you are," he said. "You just forgot for a while. But you're here now. You're home. And we have the rest of our lives to remember together." Grace closed her eyes. For the first time in 15 years, she felt like she belonged somewhere. Not because of the wealth surrounding her, not because of the name she had only recently learned was hers, but because of a truth that had been written on her skin since the day she was born. A mark that said, simply and without qualification, "You are known. You are wanted. You are loved. And no matter how far you wander, no matter how long the road or how dark the years between, you will always find your way home." If this story moved you, I want you to do 2 things. Subscribe to this channel because we tell stories about people society overlooks. Stories about resilience and identity and the kind of love that refuses to stop looking. And leave a comment. Tell me, have you ever felt invisible? Have you ever discovered something about yourself that changed the entire story you thought you were living? Your words matter here. Your experience matters here. Hit the like button, share this with someone who needs it, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story. Until then, you are not invisible. You never were. And whatever you are carrying, you are not carrying it alone.